At midnight, after sharing the Passover meal with his disciples, he left the upper room and led them to Gethsemane. Gethsemane was a garden at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Now, the word Gethsemane means oil press. And that actually was quite symbolic. Just before he was crucified, we see him being pressed in the Garden of Gethsemane, the oil press, crying out and really asking God, can you let this cup pass from me? We see him feeling the pressure of his call, feeling the burden of his call. And so it was in this garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, the oil press, where he left his disciples and went farther into the garden and fell on his face in prayer. So Judas, along with the temple police, came to Gethsemane and arrested Jesus. Now, Jesus was first brought before the Jewish Sanhedrin council for an ecclesiastical trial. The Sanhedrin council was made up of 70 men, 70 Jewish men. The Sanhedrin council was the highest governmental body in Israel. Whenever the Sanhedrin council made a rule, that was it. Now, the scriptures tell us that he was taken first to Annas. Now, interestingly, Annas had no official position at that time. 20 years before, Annas was the high priest. Now, the high priest was the top governmental office in Israel. He was not the sitting or reigning high priest, but he was still called high priest. When they went to Annas, he had what would have been called an informal preliminary inquiry. And then he sent Jesus, because remember now, he never really had the authority to be holding or hosting a real inquiry, right? So he sent Jesus to his son-in-law, who was Caiaphas, the high priest. Caiaphas was amongst the Sanhedrin. Well, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the president. Now, they had been having conversations. They had been plotting, trying to figure out how to get Jesus, how to get rid of Jesus, how to kill Jesus. Actually, in scripture, it's reported that Caiaphas had said that, listen me, sometimes we've got to be prepared for one to die for the many. So now Jesus is arrested, taken to Annas. Annas do his thing and sends him on to Caiaphas. This is now in the middle of the night. There were some of the other members of the Sanhedrin council who were at Caiaphas' house, and Jesus is brought to them. Now, Sanhedrin council is not supposed to be convening in middle of night to be having trial, but they were so anxious to get rid of Jesus that they decided, we're not going to delay, we're going to start the case right now. Kangaroo court. According to the law in Israel, the Sanhedrin council could not be legally convened before sunrise. So what they decided to do was that they were going to try him then and there for two reasons. One, they didn't want to delay, and two, most people would have been asleep. They wanted to get rid of him without a riot. So they decided that they're going to therefore have the court, and then what they will do is that in the morning they will convene the Sanhedrin Council properly and simply ratify the decision that was taken in the night. Now, this same Caiaphas was sitting as president of the Sanhedrin Council, as judge in the matter against a man that he already said needed to die. So understand that in this case, we're having a judge that has already decided the case before the case has started. Caiaphas now is sitting there, and his aim is simply to get Jesus convicted. So he began to question him about his disciples and his doctrine, because what he was hoping to do was to unearth some things, some anti-Roman sympathies. He wanted Jesus to say things that suggested that Jesus was against the Roman Empire. He had a vested interest in pitting Jesus against the Roman Empire. If you will remember, I told you earlier in this series that the Jews never had crucifixion as one of their death penalty methods. So it was important that the Romans would want to kill Jesus. So he tried to get Jesus to say something about the Roman Empire that would have gone against Jesus, that he could use against Jesus. So he questioned him about his disciples and his doctrine, and Jesus responded in St. John 18, 20 and 21. So he was not able to get Jesus to incriminate himself in that way. So he decided that, something, we need to bring in some witnesses. And so they brought in some false witnesses against Jesus, in the hope that these witnesses would provide evidence on which they could sentence Jesus to death. But guess what? The witnesses failed to agree. So he demanded of Jesus whether or not he was the Messiah. And Jesus responded in Mark 14 verse 62. And Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Hold on. Listen to me. Clearly Jesus wasn't running from the dead, because he could have just said, I am, But he further infuriated them. He said, you want to know, let me tell you how it go. Not only am I the Messiah, but you're going to see me seated at the right hand of God. You're going to see me seated at the right hand of God. You're going to see me seated at the right hand of power. And you're going to see me coming in the clouds of heaven. Can you imagine how mad them get? Listen to me, man. Caiaphas was out of his mind with joy. He was ecstatic. Because yes, Jesus sink himself now. Catch him. Mark 14, 63 to 65. Let's just read that account quickly. Are you ready? Let's read it quickly. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows.